I feel like I've been here all day trying to make this thing work. All day, all night. Third charm's a try, right? Something like that. I removed my earphones and poked Brandon on the shoulder. He took off his headset. Yeah? I was just wondering if you asked out Kathy last night like you were planning to. He slipped back on his earphones and turned the volume up on his Walkman. Brandon had this horrible crush on a girl in the 10th grade named Kathy. I could sort of tell by the cute, crushing tension in her voice that she liked him too. She always smiled and touched her hair when he was close. He always turned stumble-tongued. I think she knew how much he liked her. I think he knew how much she liked him too. The tragedy of it all, and there always is a tragedy to it all, is that her father beat her. He beat her and did other terrible things to her. She wasn't scared to tell us the gruesome details of her personal horror stories either. She trusted us and spoke to us about her suffering often. She never spoke to Brandon about it though, and looking back on it, I understand why. Brandon knew though. He knew. He saw that her jeans were stained, and he could see the scars on her legs where fingernails had dug into her soft skin. She was embarrassed and terrified of getting hurt by another big man. Brandon had been trying every day for months to muster the courage to tell her how much he adored her, but at the last moment he always chickened out. After every failed attempt, he was filled to the brim with regret and self-doubt. How he longed to be her protector, how he desired to be her tall, dark knight in shining armor that would ride to her rescue and smack her father around. But in the end, he was just too scared, and that's the tragedy of it all. Brandon took off his headset and his eyes were watery. I just couldn't bring myself to say anything to her. I can never bring myself to say anything to her. I couldn't understand his stupid infatuation, and I suggested that Brandon just get a new video game to take his mind off of Kathy. Typical Virgo attitude. He laughed. He had a very nice way of laughing, deep like Earl Jones. He wiped his cheek. I guess he thought I was joking. He straightened up in the seat, and Thupton tossed him a pack of mints. Brandon took one and put it in his mouth, then handed the pack back to me to hand to Thupton. This was what he did every morning. I didn't know why he let himself get so absorbed in the angst of his obsession, but I understood that girls possessed a certain magnetism that tugged at the eyes of boys, and I was no different. Girls have this wonderful curvature about them that I loved watching as they moved. So feline. I found it fantastic. But it didn't matter what they looked like. I could never trust any of them. The bus came to a stop, and two small brothers with thick southern accents got on, and behind them was Kathy, her beaten black aura matching Brandon's perfectly. She walked down the aisle in her red, high-top Converses and cuffed-up Levi's. She was wearing her blonde hair back in a ponytail and had her thick, black-framed, boxy-looking glasses on. Her nose was pierced through the septum. She did it herself, too. What a brave girl. I felt infinite amounts of envy for her courage. Brandon popped in his breath mint without Kathy noticing him and scooted over. She sat next to him. He smiled and looked out the window that was fogged up. She put a hand on his leg for a few seconds and then quickly but reluctantly removed it. She looked up at me. "What in the hell happened to your face, Jacob?" Brandon looked over at me. I guess he didn't notice before, too absorbed in his self-loathing. "Oh, it's nothing at all. I think I banged it on the nightstand in the middle of the night or something. You think you banged it on the nightstand? She said. What do you mean, you think? Either you did it or you didn't. Now, did you or not? It was a few seconds before I answered her. I guess this is how she felt when she tried to tell Brandon about her father. I looked over at Thupton and he smiled and nodded his head. It was Mr. Riley. He smacked me a little, but it's no big deal. I think I deserved it. Brandon spoke up. What did you do to deserve that? I talked back to him. There's no reason you can't talk back. He's not your dad. That's freaking stupid. What a bastard, Kathy said in a heated whisper to me from across the aisle. He needs to be taught a lesson, added Brandon. He seemed sympathetic. I just shrugged and looked down at my tapping feet. A voice in my head spoke the word that was written out to me in my daydream the day before. Believe. Instantly, I had this complete calm rush over me, through me, like water rushing all over my body, inside and out. I slowed my breathing, could feel my heartbeat soften. I thought about that pterodactyl floating effortlessly on the wind, gliding like a kite, but not hindered by a string, free, fearless, and most of all, at peace. The rest of the gang got on the bus and flooded into the back seats. I was around my allies, my cellmates. There was Brandon and Kathy, Thupton, Simon, Tommy, Aaron, and Chris. They were all here. This was my family. I greeted each one of them warmly, and we spoke of bands and parents, rumors, hopes, and dreams. We spoke of our extinction. Soon, I was absorbed into another daydream, one about Mr. Riley laughing and pointing at a small group of penguins in Antarctica. Before I knew it, we were at school. I could hear the sweet songs of Arctic whales singing for me somewhere deep within my imagination. Back to reality. It was a boring school day. I stood with my group of friends in the far corner of the courtyard at lunch. We joked around, played Dungeons and Dragons, and watched the pretty girls in the more popular clans prance about. My schedule had been changed a few days earlier. They had put me into a more accelerated English class because my previous teacher thought that I was much too bright to be in such a slow-paced freshman class. I was excited because I got to be in Thupton's sophomore level class, and I had heard that the teacher was extremely artsy and pleasant. Thupton said that she stood up on her desk to read poetry to the students. That sounded marvelous to me. The best part of my schedule change was the fact that my route to class had also changed. I had to walk a completely different path, a path that brought me to her. I didn't yet know her name, but she was beautiful. She was breathtaking, a short, pale wallflower with long brown dreadlocks and a brown messenger bag thrown over her shoulder, and an aura swirling with dark orange and pink that blended together like sherbet. I tried to tell what color her eyes were, but she would never look up. She just watched her feet as she dragged them across the floor. I thought that was the best part of her. That day, I saw her standing by the doorway of an 11th grade science class, across the hall from my new English class. She looked up, caught a glimpse of me, and frowned. I didn't understand why for a moment, and then I remembered that my face was bruised. Did she feel sorry for me? If she did, I thought, that means two things. She noticed me, and she cares about my well-being. This would fuel many daydreams, this one split-second look of generous concern. She looked back down and walked into her science class. I let out a long sigh and entered my new English class. I sat down next to Thubten. 2 boys watched Thubten and I talk, with cocked brows and curious expressions. Maybe they thought I got into a fight at lunch or something. I thought nothing of it, and told Thubten that I had a crush on a girl. He smiled and said that he thought he also had a crush on someone. It didn't occur to me then that I should ask who. He asked me what her name was, and I told him I didn't know. We faced back towards the front when Miss Bessett walked in. She was a young, pretty, and eccentric, with a flashy purple aura. Thubten and I didn't talk for the rest of the class, and other than that, it was a boring day. When class was over, she pulled me to the side and whispered something to me in a sweet, calm voice. The way she said it, I will never forget. She said, "Don't give up. I expect to be reading your poems to my future students one day." She smiled and kissed my sore cheek. But how did she know I wrote poetry? The day was over. We got back on the bus and went back home. I found myself wondering who Thubten had a crush on, but we seldom asked each other personal questions, and I figured that he would just tell me if it was important. That's how we worked. There were no secrets between us. I got off the bus, waving to my friends, and walked up the slanted driveway, and saw that my mother's car was the only one there. No pickup. I was deeply relieved. When I unlocked the front door and walked inside, I could see that my mother's door was closed, down the hall from the living room. Whenever Mr. Riley was gone, she feigned headaches and took naps or watched television by herself in her bedroom. I didn't know if she was just trying to avoid me, or if she didn't find my existence something of interest. Either way, she steered clear of me. When Mr. Riley was gone, I didn't go outside. There was no reason to. No battles were fought in his absence. I felt very comfortable when he was gone. I grabbed a bag of potato chips from the kitchen and turned on my radio to the college station and crawled under my bed. I clicked on my flashlight and found my notebook. I went to a blank page and took a moment to sort the different pinks and oranges from my box of worn crayons. I drew the swirling, gaseous form of a girl that looked ghost-like in a way. The 2 colors mingled together in perfect harmony. She was beautiful. I closed my eyes and thought about her very hard. She looked like an Emily, so I neatly penned the word in spiraling cursive letters next to the drawing. My mother never cooked when it was just the 2 of us, so I had all night to daydream about Emily. I could make up stories about the 2 of us forever if I wanted. I could craft epic poems exalting our fiery love. In these poems and in these stories, she was named Emily and I was named Billy, and everything was perfect. We swam nude in a fantasy creek that I named St. Lawrence Stream. We toilet papered houses together at night. We dressed up like skeletons for Halloween, and we kissed in a tire swing, upside down. All of these stories had a possible end, a grand finale. Billy and Emily would fall in love and get married. But I could never bring myself to finish writing them. Maybe I wanted to wait for reality, or maybe I just didn't want to put an end to such a lovely story. Either way, they were all left incomplete, a dream cut short by waking reality. I wrote until my eyes were fluttering shut, cheek resting against the open pages of my notebook. I'd only had a few chips, but I wasn't hungry. She weighed so heavily on my mind that food seemed insubstantial. For the first time, I understood how Brandon felt. I was lifting off to slumberland, embarking on a dream that I would never forget. There is a small cottage that acts as an orphanage for mentally retarded children that no one wants. It has 3 stories and a large wooden balcony that overlooks a large, wonderful meadow of tall yellow grass that ripples in the wind like the waves of an ocean. 3 mentally disabled children sneak out of their simple rooms and onto the balcony. They plan to run away that evening. There's an older boy, the leader of the 3. I see through his eyes and feel through his heart, though he is not me and I am not him. There is a younger girl and a boy that separates them in age. They stand there on the balcony and feel happy, and I felt happy through them. I felt as though I am in God's palm, and the wind rushes through my hair and tugs at my soul, ready to whisk it off to someplace special. It is phenomenal how I feel. I never feel this elation in waking life, for it is easier to be happy when you are simple. The children climb off the balcony and down the wooden beams that hold it upright. They fill their hands with splinters and they start crying, not because of the pain, but because of the reality of the situation. They are on their own now, and no one can tell them what to do or what medicines they need to take. They take off like 3 wild animals into the field, holding their arms outstretched like birds about to take flight. They laugh, loud and powerful. The 3 of them come to an abrupt stop when they notice a large bald eagle standing in the middle of their path, looking straight at them. The eagle stands perfectly still, making no attempt to harm them in any way. But the older boy picks up a stone from the ground. He can do anything he wants now, and no one can stop him. He is so filled with this unconquerable sensation that he rears back and throws the rock as hard as he can at the eagle. It hits the bird's leg and breaks it. The bird falls to the ground, flapping its wings and squawking at the heavens for retribution. Instantly, after breaking the bird's leg, the boy feels sorry for what he has done, but the regret is not enough to water down his freedom. He and the other 2 children run off and forget about the bird. They are excited and yelling. They enter the forest and sit together in the mud and eat mushrooms. The bird of prey hops out from behind the boulder on 1 leg to remind the boy. He saw him and is reminded of his sin. And so they flee to the river and sit on the rocks, drink the water, and eat mystical fruits from the forest. But the bird hops out from behind an oak stump, and the boy is reminded of his grievance. Still, he smiles and plays, and the bird flies away. They stay up until morning, and when the sun is rising, they run back through the field. I am once again filled with complete euphoria that the boy feels as he runs toward the rising sun. The sky is blue, pink, and orange, and covered in milky red streaks of long, blurred clouds. They run. They run as fast as their little legs will take them, and their arms are stretched up to praise God for their newfound freedom. As the older boy extends his arms and mouths a few happy mumbling words, the eagle dives out of the sky on his great wings. With his one sharp, unscathed claw, he rips off the older boy's scalp and a good portion of his skull. The boy falls down dead, bleeding from the hole in his head, his brain hanging half out and exposed. He dies there, in that field of the rising sun, with a smile on his face that stretches from ear to ear. The two clean children look at his body, not knowing what to do. They stand and poke him for a few minutes, and then they run, crying, back to the orphanage. My dream melted away to a room of dark nothingness, and I wake up. I don't know what it all meant, but it was very important. It was crystal clear in my memory, which was rare for my dreams. I looked at my clock. 3 o'clock in the a.m. I was wide-eyed and very much awake. I wrote down the contents of my dream in the notebook under my bed. I drew a picture of an eagle with a broken leg in mid-flight and a boy bleeding from the head. The dying boy was holding a rock and grinning. I tried to analyze the dream, and Thubten's voice came into my mind. There are 3 kinds of karma, I remembered him explaining to me. Karma that returns to you immediately for an act you commit, karma that returns to you later for an act that you committed previously in this life, and karma that returns to you from past lives. This karma was the first type. The boy was blinded by his own freedom, and he paid the heavy price of his own life. I guess it all boiled down to the golden rule. If everyone was compassionate, the world would be paradise. Unfortunately, most people follow their own set of rules, and that typically is, I must do what I have to do to get what I want. For people like that, there is always a bird in the sky waiting to bring them down. Maybe not right then, or even in this lifetime, but someday. And that is the tragedy of it all. This is the 3rd type of karma. And that's the end of Chapter 2, Book 1. I will be back for Chapter 3 next week. Good night.